Welcome in, everyone, to episode 145 of the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with David and Matt. Today, we're going to recap the Wild last week of the season that we had. We're going to talk about some managers that have been relieved of their duties, and then we are going to look ahead to the wild card round, break all that down, and give our predictions for that. But before we get into all of this, David, how are you doing this week?
We were doing better at the start of last week. Now we're not doing so hot. Watching the Cubs give it all up there, but overall it's a nice little weekend there, and
Spoiler
back
alert.
at it. Yeah, a little bit of a spoiler, but in terms of life, we're good. Matt, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing really good. I'm on vacation. I'm down at the beach, and I'm doing this on my phone. So if something goes wonky at some point, then that's probably what's going on. But everything's been good. I'm excited for the postseason. You know, my team played some meaningful games for other teams last week, but it wasn't really that meaningful for my team. Just some milestones that players and the team itself hit over the last week, so that was fun to watch. And then looking forward to the postseason. I'm ready to watch some wild card baseball because I don't have to go through that stress this year.
Yeah, I'm glad that we don't have to go through wild card weekend, Matt. David, I guess we're glad you don't have to go through wild card weekend either, right?
I would have much preferred to go through wild card weekend.
No, but it was a really crazy week that we had happen with. Last week we talked about we had multiple teams playing each other throughout the week for seedings there, and then the wild card, what that all looked like, and one of the teams, which we'll talk about here in a sec, like they had one of their games postponed. We're gonna have to play a doubleheader, and then we're in a third one, and it got suspended. Like, it was just all types of craziness this past week, which makes for a really fun episode here and a really fun wild card weekend, or week, I guess. It's not really a weekend anymore. A wild card week that we get to talk about. But let's go ahead and start off first with just a little bit of managerial news that we've had happen over this past week so far. Gabe Kapler of the San Francisco Giants, I believe it was Friday, was relieved of his duties. So he will not be back there. Buck Showalter came out, I believe it was Sunday, and announced that he will not be returning to the New York Mets this year or next season. And then today, this is Monday as we're recording a day earlier, Phil Nevin has been relieved of his duty as the Angels manager. So far, Giants, Mets, and Angels are on the hunt for new managers, along with the Guardians, which we already knew because Terry Francona retired. But any your guys' thoughts on those so far, those openings?
Yeah, I thought that the Gabe Kapler one was shocking to me because I know that the Giants struggled down the stretch this year, but I thought that was a lot of that was a talent issue for them more so than I felt like they kind of over the last 3 years have gotten every last bit they could out of the talent on their team. So I don't know. I do feel like Gabe Kapler is kind of he's a guy that probably clashes with people sometimes. So that's probably what happened. If I had to guess, I don't know that he that might not be what happened, but I don't know why from a baseball, strategic standpoint or results standpoint, I don't think he deserved to get canned. The other two, I mean, Buck Showalter was just a kind of a weird one to start with for the Mets. I know they did really well last year, but it didn't really make a ton of sense. I think they were trying to capitalize on the bringing back, former good managers wave that was going on there for a couple years, like Dusty Baker winning the World Series and stuff. I mean, they kind of felt like Buck Showalter's veteran leadership would help, but I mean, he was just kind of. I don't think he necessarily did a horrible job for the Mets. I just don't think he really moves the needle. And at a certain point, if you're not just killing it, with he's already retired once, so it makes sense to just move on. And then Phil Nevin, I'm not surprised he got fired. I mean, he was brought up as an interim last year when they fired Joe Madden, and I mean, it's not like it's not like he's had any success whatsoever. And I mean, I don't necessarily think he's a terrible manager, but I mean, when your team does what the Angels did this year, with their collapse, like it's hard to keep that manager around. So Definitely some interesting stuff. I'm shocked at the Gabe Kapler, and I wonder if San Francisco has somebody in mind to bring in, because that could be part of that story too.
Yeah, I think it's more even a thing with the Mets here is they have a target in mind. That said, I don't know how a team with such high aspirations and a huge payroll like the Mets can move to next season with the same manager here. So regardless of whether David Stearns has signing Craig Counsell in mind here after the season, when it comes to the Mets, I think Buck Showalter's kind of time was numbered once they underperformed. And I think we're looking at potentially the Padres ending up with a similar fate with Bob Melvin. Um, that's still kind of to be determined. But the teams that severely underperformed seem to get, oh, let's try to change things at manager. I think that's where the Giants jumped, but it's a little bit odd because Gabe Kapler had overperformed. And when your team is overperforming, one of those things you can point to, especially given the Giants roster, being Brandon Crawford and Brandon Belt and Wilmer Flores for years and years, right? And it was just this kind of amalgamation of mediocre hitters, and Logan Webb would throw 200 innings, but they really didn't have they'd have a Camilo Doval, but not a whole lot of stars on that Giants team. And it's something they tried to attempted to fix this offseason by trying to sign Aaron Judge and Carlos Correa, and neither of those went through. And the Giants end up underperforming because they didn't really add behind those attempted superstars. Where if that team adds 5 WAR from Aaron Judge, they might they're right there on the cusp of the postseason. So I feel like that Gabe Kapler's a scapegoat for the failings of the front office there. And ultimately, if he does have a bad relationship or something, then that's another story. But for now, it seems like he's getting scapegoated out of his job there. And Phil Nevin got tossed into a lose-lose situation. If you don't win with Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, you, even when the front office got players at the deadline, you weren't going to keep your job if you didn't win. So Phil Nevin he was in a lose-lose there, where if he had won but Ohtani had left, the team wasn't going to be good enough for him to stick around after a year or two anyway. So the Angels are just getting out ahead of what's going to probably be a lengthy rebuild.
Yeah, the Gabe Kapler one was the really weird one to me. Just because he did have the prior relationship with Farhan Zaidi from their LA days, where Farhan was the GM and Gabe Kapler was like the farm director or whatever. There had been a couple rumors kind of floating around that maybe the Giants are looking at the Bob Melvin situation and, would be a player in that if he's gone, because they did have Farhan and him did have the relationship from Oakland as well. Still, it's just really weird. But I think the other two, Showalter and Nevin, I think you could see the signs that those were both kind of coming. Nevin was on a lame duck contract anyway, so he really just didn't get re-signed as a manager. And Buck, it just kind of felt like it worked a little bit, and then now it's like with Stearns coming in and wanting his own guy in there, it just kind of made sense at this moment for both of those. And I'm sure there's going to be a couple more openings that are probably going to come up here in the next couple weeks. But let's go ahead and start by looking at the last week. And as we were recording, what the standings looked like, and then we can recap the week that was. So as of last week reporting, the AL West was Texas was leading it. They were 88-69. They were leading Houston by 2.5 games, and then Seattle by 3 games. Texas was the number 2 seed. They had the first round bye. And then looking at the wild card, you had Tampa Bay. They were 96-62. They were locked in. You had Toronto. They were 87-70, 2 games up on the third wild card spot. You had Houston in that third wild card spot by only half a game over Seattle. So basically on that one. So over the past week, Houston went 4-1. I think they won. One of those games was against Seattle, that one. And then Seattle went to Texas, I believe, to face the Rangers. Seattle won 3 of the 4 there, so that dropped Texas down to the 5 seed. Houston jumped up to the number 2 seed. They tied in the division, so Texas had the tiebreaker there. And Texas basically lost the home field advantage. They now have to face Tampa Bay, but then Toronto dropped down to 6, and Seattle ends up missing the postseason. So just a wild week in the AL West race that had Houston jump up over Texas by, from the back 2.5 games. And then Texas falling to that 5 seed there in the playoffs, in the wild card there. But just a wild week. David, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a bit crazy because Texas, was kind of in that driver's seat going into the week. They had a chance to put away the Mariners early, and by losing early in the weekend, they allowed the Mariners to kind of get that confidence that, oh, maybe we can make it happen. Maybe we can make up the gap. It ends up not working out, but then by then, Houston's won enough games. Games that now Texas is tied with them, and they didn't have the tiebreaker. And formerly there was a game 163 where they would play the single game to determine the winner of the division. If you may recall, that's where the Cubs played the Brewers in 2018, which that's a game that the Cubs lost. They went to the wild card and they immediately got smoked by the Rockies. So it's not a
evidence. I think in that year, that's the year that Rockies lost game 163 to the Dodgers and had to go to the wild card.
Yeah, I remember that.
So
2 game 163s. I don't like that we're taking away game 163, and for what it's worth, there would have been another one for the NL wild card. We'll get to that in a sec. But the races were really tight. There were a lot of teams going for it. It was good to see, very healthy to have a playoff race this full, and a team that I think could have probably won the World Series in the Seattle Mariners, with all that pitching, doesn't make the playoffs, and that's surprising because I would have thought that this team kind of would pull it together and figure it out, and they're gonna watch from home, and I think that's gonna be a team on a mission. I think the missing the playoffs by a little bit can really galvanize your group and galvanize your front office to make some big changes, and I think we'll see those from Seattle this season. But a wild week for the AL, and I think Texas is maybe the biggest loser of all this because instead of getting the bye, they have to now go face the Tampa Bay Rays, who are maybe the most difficult out of any team right now that's going to be playing this week on wildcard week. So just a difficult situation now for Texas, where Houston was kind of playing catch up the whole time, and they get a tiebreaker, and now they're sitting at home.
Yeah, this week for the American League was it was very interesting to me because you had the series in Seattle with the Rangers. I mean, with the Astros facing the Mariners was, I thought whoever won that series was going to make that wild card, and whoever lost that series was going home. And the Astros went in there and they took care of business and took 2 out of 3 from the Mariners. And I mean, honestly, the Mariners offense just kind of let them down a little bit. And that's kind of been the thing this year. Their lineup's just not all that deep. They've got, they've got a few really good players. Julio Rodriguez, Cal Raleigh's a good player. J.P. Crawford had an unbelievable season. Teoscar Hernandez picked it up a little bit in the second half, but, Ty France had a rough year. Eugenio Suarez isn't all that great. And then you got, Josh Rojas was playing second base in just about every one of those games. Kelenic is hit or miss, but, he's been pretty much missed since April. So it's
He's also hurt.
And he's been hurt, but he played this week. And I think just their offense in general is just not quite. I think they just needed a little bit more depth there. They need a couple more bats, and they tried. They went out, signed Colton Wong, who had a good year at the plate last year. Like they did a few things to try and help that, but it just didn't work. So I'm sure they'll go into the offseason and look into improving that. And then for the AL West win, the Astros passing the Rangers. I have no idea what the Rangers were thinking having their big celebration when they clinched the wild card and just clinched making the postseason. Because I wonder if that affected them in the following day, because they had their big champagne celebration, and then the next day they had to win to make the playoffs. I mean, to win the division. Sorry, they had already made the playoffs. So that, to me, like, I would have waited until after that last game and kept everyone focused up, because they lost 1-0. So their bats obviously didn't show up to the yard, and I wonder if they might have been seeing double after the celebration the night before. But definitely wild, and of course, um, there was all year it looked like Houston was not gonna win this division. It looked like it was going to be somebody else, somebody new. There's been all these other teams in this division who at times this year have, even there was a time there when the Angels were healthy that they were kind of up there too. Like, there's been times where the talk of baseball is every other team in this division, and it turns out at the end it ends up being the Astros. So definitely interesting. In Texas, not only are they now a wild card team, they have to go to the Trop. They have to go to Tampa and play on the road, which, and that's just that was not a good thing in to lose in that last day for them.
Yeah, it was an interesting case about them taking or doing that celebration the night before. There, and like you guys mentioned, Seattle going into this year, where a lot of people thought they were going to be the team to win this division this year. And then, it was at the deadline, they made a couple moves where, like, selling off Paul Sewald, which didn't go over well in the clubhouse. They miss it by one game here. You have Cal Raleigh calling out the front office on that aspect. So it's going to be an interesting offseason for Seattle, seeing what they're going to be able to do. But like Matt mentioned there, nobody talked really about Houston being able to win this division for most of it. I mean, they were underperforming for a long time. They had pitching questions. They went out and got Verlander. That Jose Abreu came back and, or not came back. He started hitting a little bit. And it just, at the last day of the season, they literally tied for the division on the last day of the season to take it back the lead there. So yeah, just a wild week in the American League with all these teams playing each other. And, even Toronto, they really weren't playing much, but they went 2-4 and they fell down to only a game, being the last wild card team by a game over Seattle, when it was Toronto coming into this year where a lot of people's picked to win the AL East. And they barely made the wild card by only a game. So it's going to be a fascinating wild card week for the American League. But we'll talk about those matchups here in a second. And let's go ahead and look over at the National League week that we had. So the divisions had pretty much all been decided as of our last recording. So really it came down to the wild card there. Philadelphia was leading. I think they had like a 5-game lead. They were all but virtually locked in at that moment. Arizona was 83-74. They had a 2.5 game lead on the wild card spot. Chicago was 82-75. They were a half game up. Miami was a half game back, and then Cincinnati was a game and a half back. And basically, I think it was as we were recording, I think Miami had their game rained out. I believe it was Tuesday. They had to do a doubleheader the next day. They went 1-1 on that one. Then on Thursday, they had a game against the Mets where they took the lead in the top of the 9th inning. New York got hit with like monsoon rain. So that game ended up getting suspended in the top of the 9th with Miami leading 2-1. And basically they told them, like, hey, if this game matters, you're going to have to come back Monday and play the 9th inning, basically the rest of it. And then, so they went on to Pittsburgh and they were going to have to play through Pittsburgh. Chicago was facing Milwaukee.
And the Braves.
The Braves at the time, and then Milwaukee.
I'll go through the Cubs' thing.
Yeah. And Arizona, they had Houston over the weekend, which were fighting for the division, which we're just saying that they went 4-1, how that turned out. So it ended up being a wild week in that as well, that ended up seeing Philadelphia obviously make it. Miami jumped up over Arizona and the Cubs, going 3-2, and they didn't even have to play that other game that was suspended in the 9th. they got it by half a game over Arizona, and that wouldn't have mattered because Miami had the tiebreaker over both of those. So even if that they lost the game, they would have been the 5 seed there. But it came down to the last day where if Arizona had won that game and Miami had lost, they said that Arizona would be the 5 seed. They wouldn't basically play the 9th inning in Monday. They said that on like Saturday night or something. So it's just a really weird week with Miami having games rained out, but still making enough of a push to, make it in there. Arizona, struggling as well against Houston. The Cubs really falling flat on their face, which David will talk about here, and then Cincinnati just going 2-3 to not make it. But yeah, so Philadelphia, Miami, Arizona ended up being the NL wild card. So David, go ahead and talk about the collapse of the Cubs here.
Yeah, so when we were recording last week, Cubs were up 6-0 on the Braves. Looking good. We knew the Marlins had the doubleheader the next day. Figured that was a big start. The Cubs managed to blow the first of 2 6-0 leads they held this week, and it kind of collapsed on Seiya Suzuki missing a routine fly ball in the 9th inning of that game on Tuesday, and that was the moment where it wasn't over yet, but it was over. And the Cubs they were completely lifeless the rest of the week. Braves, they got the lead on the Braves, I think, in the second game of the series as well, and third game they got blown out. They got a 6-0 lead on Milwaukee in one of the games. I think it was on Saturday when they were still alive, and immediately it was 2 innings it took them to blow that. So I think the Cubs were just exhausted. It was just a miserable week. Seiya Suzuki was a big part of why they got to this point. He had been one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball over the second half, and a drop is what's going to be his biggest highlight from this season in the outfield. So really disappointing on that front. But for what you look at here as we kind of look at the stats and stuff, the Cubs had a plus like 100 run differential, and the Marlins have a negative 50 run differential. That's a pretty stark contrast, but the Marlins were the ones getting the job done here late. Cubs gave up too many games, blew a lot of leads, just weren't sound when it mattered. And that's what's going to kind of be the lingering message of this 2023 season. The Reds end on a more positive note as a team that finishes above 500 that wasn't really supposed to finish above 500 this year. And, with Matt McLain getting hurt, it kind of never felt like they were really going to make a push. But, you do feel like the Reds are going to compete for the NL Central next year. That's a team that's kind of dangerous. And, theirs feels a lot more encouraging than the Cubs. And I do hope that the Cubs management and front office gets a little angry and does something about collapsing in the later part of the season. A lot of it due to poor bullpen. They didn't get a bullpen arm at the deadline other than Jose Cuas, who pitched I think every game this week and gave up runs in all of them. Like it was just rough. So hopefully they change something. But Matt, how about them teams that made it in?
Yeah, so first off, just on the Cubs, because I watched three or four of their games this week. It just seems like they just didn't have enough depth in their pitching. Like you said, their bullpen kept blowing these leads, and you also had just Marcus Stroman wasn't himself and got smacked around in that game.
He was hurt. Yeah.
And when you have a bullpen that is, not when you have a bullpen that's not very good, and the manager knows it, he's going to overextend the pitching to the starting pitching. So when you have a guy like Justin Steele pitched really really well in that first game, and then David Ross probably left him in a little bit too long, but who are you going to go to is kind of the thing. Same thing happened. Jamison Taillon pitched a gem against the Braves, which was shocking. But, he kind of gave up a couple runs in his last inning of work. So that was a big deal. And, I mean, that's kind of the thing the Braves have been doing all year to teams, too. I mean, they're never out of a game because they hit so well. But the teams that did make it in, Arizona, just great year for them. They're ahead of schedule, I think. They're going to be a dangerous team for the Brewers because, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but that's a team that has two really good pitchers and a lineup that I think is going to do well in postseason baseball. They hit for some power, and they have a lot of speed. They get on base, and they can force your hand if they get on base, and make a team panic a little bit. And I think that's a big part of being really good in the postseason is if you can kind of make the other team panic a little bit. So, but they didn't do great this week, but they did enough. They had they were the ones that let the Astros in. So, and then just Miami, I'm telling you, like that team. I think they came back from a 3-run deficit 2 or 3 times this week. They were down in the ninth inning in that game against the Mets, which if they had not scored in the ninth inning there and taken the lead, then that game wouldn't have been a suspended game. They would have lost. And then you look at and then over the weekend they were down 4 or 3-0 to the Pirates in the eighth inning, and they scored 4 to win. And I think they had one more game this week where they were down by 3 runs and they came back. So, good for the Marlins. I mean, you've got to feel good for that team. They had a lot of issues too. They've had a lot of injuries. I mean, Sandy hadn't been wasn't really himself, and then he's been hurt. Yuri Perez went down at the end of the year. Like Trevor Rogers, who was that their all-star pitcher a couple years ago, he had Tommy John surgery. Like you had a lot of issues. Jazz missed a bunch of time early in the season. So Lairs missed time. Arias got hurt last weekend. I think he pinch hit maybe once or twice over the weekend, but Arias has been hurt this last week, and they just somehow kept winning these close games. And it's got to feel good for the Marlins. This is only their 4th ever postseason appearance. It's their first postseason appearance in 20 years that was not a COVID shortened season. And if I was a Cubs fan, I would probably want the Marlins to not be good because it seems like every time they make the postseason, it's at the expense of the Cubs.
It's at the expense of the Cubs. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, because
hopefully they're bad next year.
Yeah. So we'll see what the Marlins do next year, but that'll be interesting. But yeah, it's a cool thing to see a team like that was a true underdog as a neutral fan. If it's not a fan of the Cubs or the Marlins, it's cool to see a team like the Marlins, who's a true underdog, get to celebrate. Even though I think they're going to get bounced pretty quick. So
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the matchup that they have to face, but what a year for Skip Schumacher. I mean, to come in as a first-year manager and deal with all of these injuries and all the struggles that they were put through there in Miami this season, to be able to, as a first-year manager, make the playoffs with a team that nobody was probably picking to even get close to this point. And had you told them that all those issues were going to happen, I bet nobody would have picked them to make the playoffs. So real big shout out to Skip Schumacher in his first year making the playoffs there. But yeah, it was just a really, really weird week for all of those teams with everything that happened in Miami with their games, the Cubs just blowing, I think 3 or 4 leads, like you guys mentioned, and Arizona having to face Houston. And I think they even had a couple leads in that game and gave them up too. It's just a wild one it was. So let's look at the full bracket real quick, and then we will jump to the wild card matchup. So in the National League, we've talked about it. It's the Braves and the Dodgers are the 1 and 2 seeds. They have the first round byes. Looking over in the American League, Baltimore and Houston are the 1 and 2 seeds respectively there. They get their first round byes. So looking at the wild card matchups, Toronto and Minnesota, it's going to be in Minnesota for the right to go face Houston. It's going to be Texas in Tampa Bay for the right to go face Baltimore. Arizona versus Milwaukee in Milwaukee to go face the Dodgers, and Miami versus Philly for the right to go face the Braves. So let's go ahead and start on the top of the American League, and Toronto and Minnesota. Let's just, David, what are your thoughts and preview predictions for this matchup?
This is a maybe I would say this is the D West matchup of the round or whatever, I don't know, but this is the most interesting one in my mind. Twins have a very, very good pitching staff between Sonny Gray, Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, I think, will be starting probably their first 3 games. Pablo Lopez was really, really strong this season. Got traded for Luis Arias. Both of them are in the playoffs, which is pretty cool for that true win-win. But I love the way that this Minnesota pitching staff matches up against the Blue Jays, as Pablo's a righty, Sonny Gray's a righty, and the Blue Jays' best hitters, Bo Bichette, George Springer, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., they're all right-handed pitchers, or right-handed hitters. So for me, this screams that the Twins have a big advantage. But those guys are all really good hitters. And, even though this pitching staff is definitely, advantage towards the Twins, Kevin Gausman is a really good pitcher. He's going to have a good game. Jose Barrios had a really resurgent season. He was solid this year, 3.65 ERA. He'll be good. But I like the Twins in this series. I just think that the offensive firepower of the Blue Jays comes and goes a lot, and the pitching of the Twins has been constant throughout the season. So, they'll have to catch lightning in a bottle a little bit, and it's probably not a good call to bet on the team that, predict the team that hasn't won a playoff series since 2002. But they got to win one sometime, right? So I'm picking the Twins. I think in 5 games. Like, this is a coin flip, strength versus strength. It's going to be a really fun series to watch. This is my favorite one. And I guess the last thing would be the bullpens might decide this, because the starting rotations are both pretty good for both teams. And I like Joan Duran a lot more than Jordan Romano. So there you go.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one for me too. I think that and then the Texas Tampa one are the two, both the American League ones for me. But the Toronto Minnesota one, it's going to be really interesting because it does sound like Minnesota's starting Pablo Lopez game 1. Sonny Gray will pitch game 2, and then I would assume Ryan pitches game 3. Gossman is pitching tomorrow for Toronto, but they have not named a game 2 or game 3 starter yet. So I'm assuming that Barrios will get one of those, which is interesting because it's going against his former team as well. But I think a big part of this is going to be, Minnesota. How healthy are they going to be? Because I know that Correa has dealt with some injuries recently. Royce Lewis has had some injuries recently, and it sounds like Byron Buxton's going to be out. So that definitely does not help them. Now, those are guys who have struggled this year too, with the exception of Lewis. You look at Carlos Correa struggled this year. Buxton struggled this year. So, it might not hurt them quite as bad as maybe in past years where those guys were like superstar players, but still, you kind of, your thoughts hinging on the Twins were that, maybe Correa, he's got such a great history in the postseason. Maybe he finally figures it out when the lights come on, and that we'll see if that happens with him dealing with some injury issues. But I think I still like the Twins in the series. The Blue Jays have a lot of question marks with their offense. Bo Bichette's done well, and Vlad Jr. But Vlad Jr.'s had a rough year. Like, he's still been an above average hitter. Like, he's got like ended up with like a 115 WRC plus or something. But he, defensively he's terrible. Base running he's terrible, and like that's kind of your superstar. And then, Springer hadn't had the same kind of year that he's had in the past, and Dalton Varsho hadn't been great. Matt Chapman, after a hot start, hadn't been very good. Alejandro Kirk hadn't been as good this year. Like, that team has a lot of question marks in the lineup, and then with the pitching staff, like, I do trust the Twins guys more than the Blue Jays guys once you get past their aces. I trust Gossman a lot. I don't especially trust Barrios, even though he's had a better year this year. I just, a lot of the metrics and stuff aren't quite as good. But Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray, and Joe Ryan, like that's going to be a tough 3 guys, especially when the bullpen shortens up. Because I think part of the Twins' problems this year were more of bullpen depth, but they've got the back end. So I think I'm going to take the Twins in this series. I think there's a good chance it ends up being a 3-gamer. But I do like the Twins' chances here. And, hey, for the Twins, I think as long as they win a game, they'll be excited because that hadn't happened in a long time.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to be the different guy here. I'm picking the Blue Jays here over Minnesota. I like Gossman, and I I like Pablo Lopez too, but I just think Gossman he's had the big game pitcher feel before. He'll be able to go in there and silence that Minnesota offense, which there's legitimate question marks around that as well. And for me, Toronto just has all the potential for their bats to do it. Playoff George Springer is a real thing. Like, he is incredible when it comes to the playoffs. It doesn't matter what he's doing at that time. I've seen it firsthand. He had a terrible playoffs almost, and then he goes in against one of the World Series against LA and hits like 5 homers or something. Like, it's incredible what he's able to do at that moment. And your big time guys tend to step up in these aspects. And I'm betting on the Vlad, the Bo Bichette, the Chapmans, the Springers. Those guys are going to rise to the occasion there. I like the Minnesota pitchers, but at the same time, I mean, Lopez he's either hit or miss. He's been really, really good this year, but he's still had almost a 3.8 something ERA. And lately at the end of the back half of the season, he's been getting lit up a lot more than he had been a dominant game. Sonny Gray, he's more of that pitch to contact type guy rather than he's going to strike you out a ton. If you give that to Toronto, if they make contact, a lot of the time those balls can go really, really far. And overall, the bullpen depth, I think I like Toronto's bullpen depth more than I like Minnesota's, even though Minnesota has a better closer in Yohan Duran. I mean, if you're talking about Romano, you're talking about Jordan Hicks, you're talking about Eric Swanson. I just think the depth of the Tampa or the Toronto bullpen is a lot better, even if their starters are a little bit more of a question mark than Minnesota's. I'm going to bet on the bullpen, and I'm going to bet on the big name offensive guys stepping up in the playoffs here, which we've seen them do before for Toronto there. So I'm going to pick Toronto over Minnesota. I do think this is going to be a 3-gamer. I think it's going to go right down to the end of that 3rd game, and we're going to have to see from there. But it's a really, really fun matchup to definitely have in the first round of the playoffs. I wish it was a 5 or a 7 game series, because I think this one, if in either of those, would have went longer. So let's go ahead and jump over to the other American League series, and that is Texas going to Tampa Bay to face the Rays. So Matt, you go ahead and go first on this one. Who are you looking at here?
Yeah, so this is another good one for me. Both of these teams at times this year have looked like the best team in baseball. I mean, because Texas just took off in the first 2 or 3 months, along with Tampa, and then they kind of came back to earth. Texas a lot more so than Tampa. I mean, Tampa really, I mean, they won 99 games. People have talked about how, oh, yeah, they haven't been that great since that April. Well, they won 99 games, and the only reason that they didn't win the division is because the Baltimore Orioles had an insane season. So, they're a very good team. In Texas, for that matter, they've dealt with a lot of issues from injuries in the second and for most of the season. I mean, they lost DeGrom. They lost Corey Seager for about a month early in the season and a month and a half. And he, after he came back, he almost played himself into being the MVP if it wasn't for Shohei. So, but they've dealt with, Jonah Heim missing a lot of time. Josh Jung missed a lot of time. Eovaldi went on the IL some. They traded for Scherzer at the deadline, and then he went on the IL. There's been a lot of attrition for both of these teams. The Rays obviously have had the same attrition. I mean, we've talked about so many times how their rotation on the IL is probably the best rotation in baseball. So it's pretty crazy that both of these teams are here with the records they've got. But I think I'm going to go with Tampa. I think they're a lot more seasoned in the postseason. They've been there a lot, and I think that you've got guys like Yandy Diaz has been there. You've got
Rosarena.
Rosarena. He's been a postseason legend. Like Manuel Margot has played really well in the postseason in the past. Brandon Lau has played really well in the postseason, although he's out. So that's another guy they're missing. But and they're pitching. I mean, Glasnow's pitched big games in the postseason. Eflin's pitched big games, and I think he pitched a lot of in the postseason last year. In fact, I think Eflin saved a game for the Phillies last year in the postseason. So Savali's pitched in the postseason when he was with Cleveland.
So you've got a lot of experience there. And I mean, when you go look at the Rangers, you've got Jordan Montgomery and Eovaldi, who has been pretty ineffective since coming off the IL, and then you've got Dane Dunning will be the other guy. So it's their rotation's a little bit shaky behind Montgomery, who's a good pitcher, but maybe not an ace. And then just the bullpen for Texas has been outside of, I think Chapman's been fine since he came over there, but that bullpen for Texas has been rough in the second half. So, and the Rays, they're going to mix and match, and their manager Kevin Cash knows what he's doing. That they're probably going to do pretty well. So, I'm going to pick the Rays with a fairly low confidence because Texas does have superstars in their lineup, and for that matter, Seager and Semien are experienced in the postseason too. But it's going to be interesting for sure. And I think both of these teams have a good shot if they win this to take down the Orioles too.
I'm going to go with the Rays, but I've got a specific reason as to why. The Rays were the number 2 team in strikeouts this season for pitching, in total team pitching, to the Minnesota Twins, who I just took as my number 1, as my number 1 pick. I'm taking the Rays as my number 2 pick. I think the Rays win in 2. I think they get both the first 2 games, and that's it. I think Texas is on a downslide because of the confidence lost in having to play this game when they were probably, in all likelihood, convinced that they did not have to play this weekend. And then you've got the pitching matchups Matt just described. Give me Eflin and Glasnow to shut down this Rangers lineup, and it's a good lineup. Adolis Garcia, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager have all been really, really good hitters this year. All of them are kind of on the fringe of probably being in the MVP votes. They'll be in the top 10 maybe. At least Semien and Seager ought to be. I do not see a world where Tampa doesn't have hasn't been planning for this for a while, and Texas has felt entitled to that bye. And they're going to go down to Tampa and get their butts kicked, and they're going to have to go back, try again next year. I think that Houston win on Sunday and the Rangers loss was a season-changing thing for the Rangers, and something that can kind of drop your confidence. So, while this is a good matchup on paper, I just think this is the one that goes 2 games. It's really quick. The Rays are ahead the whole time. Rangers can barely get a hit. I could be wrong, but this one feels like maybe not I feel very confident in my Rays in 2 pick.
Yeah, this one to me, this series was probably my hardest series to pick. This and either the D-backs in Milwaukee, which we'll talk about here in a sec, but it was really, really tough because the Rangers have been playing with less inspired baseball recently, and we've seen Tampa do this in the playoffs. We've seen Randy single-handedly take over games and just do incredible things. But to me, I think that the opposite of what David said is going to happen here. I think that Texas is going to use the fact that they feel like they should have been the 2 seed and now they're the 5 seed, and having to come into Tampa Bay after feeling that they were going to have home field, advantage as the 2 seed there. I think they're going to use that as motivation. And if there's ever a postseason manager that does it better than Bruce Bochy does, I need to see who that is, because he is a guy who always finds a way to make the most out of his teams in the playoffs. And he has that innate feel for when somebody when you need to make a change here, when you need to pull a pitcher. He's really, really good at those situations. The question marks are legitimately there. I would not be surprised if Tampa Bay takes this game or takes the series into with Texas's pitching and that, but I just think they're going to use the fact that they lost that on the last day of the season as motivation to come into Tampa Bay and try and make this a series, and try and take it from them. So I am picking the Rangers in this one. I don't know if it'll go 2. I don't think they're going to come in and take it right away. Tampa's going to get one at home, but I guess both of my AL picks are different than your guys'. I'm taking the Blue Jays and the Rangers, and you guys both took Minnesota and the Rays. So it'll be interesting. We'll have some difference there. So let's go ahead and look over at the National League side now, and let's start with the Arizona-Milwaukee series, which our picks might have been different if we didn't have that little bit of injury news come out today. So David, preview that series for us a little bit.
So Brandon Woodruff down. That doesn't change my prediction at all here. I like Diamondbacks. This is an upstart team led by rookie Corbin Carroll, who was and is going to be among the MVP vote getters this season, with 50 stolen bases, 25 home runs. He was a very, very good player for the Diamondbacks, but in the postseason, the impact of one player is mitigated, and the Brewers have a much more solid roster, top to bottom. The first game is going to be Burns versus Gallen. It might be the most fun pitching matchup that we have.
It's not.
Or will it not be?
It's not. It's Fott.
No, Brandon Fox pitching.
Yeah, there you go.
The Diamondbacks, because Gallen and Kelly had to pitch over the weekend.
Alrighty. That feels good then. I'm good with my pick then. Anyway, yeah, the Brewers have the pitching depth. Gallen's the only real elite pitcher, and the only way the Diamondbacks pitchers can get off or get outs really is when they face the Cubs. So I got the Brewers in this one. I like Christian Yelich here. He's had a really solid resurgent season. William Contreras has kind of emerged as a defensive catcher mastermind, and the Brewers seem to have something there with getting that extra value at catcher. Ultimately, that Brewers offense isn't super strong, but Mark Canha's been pretty decent since he got over there, and I'm going with the Brewers on the strength of the pitching staff, on the strength of the bullpen. This is a complete Brewers team. The Diamondbacks are running on fumes a little bit. They're not going to be sending their most optimal pitching lineups. Give me the Brewers in this one. 2 games, fairly straightforward. Maybe it'll take to 3 if Gallen pitches game 2, but I like the Brewers with Burns and Peralta in these first 2 games.
Yeah, I've had a really hard time with this one because I think that Milwaukee's offense is not great, and that the Diamondbacks have 2 pitchers who could shut down that offense. So, and I think that while Burns and Peralta are really good, missing Brandon Woodruff really hurts them because, game 1, the Brewers absolutely must win game 1 with Burns on the mound against Brandon Pfaadt. But after that, you've got the Diamondbacks have a huge advantage in their pitching matchup in both of the other 2 games, because it's going to be game 2 will be, now Peralta's a good pitcher, but Gallen is, a Cy Young contender. So game 2 is definitely a huge advantage for the Diamondbacks. And then game 3, you've got Merrill Kelly, and then I don't even know who the Brewers would start in the game 3. I mean, maybe, I guess, what would it be, like Hauser or something, or Wade Miley, or I don't even know who they would start.
Probably Wade Miley.
Yeah. So, and then they'd pull him immediately.
Would they call up? Would they call up Gasser?
No,
probably not, right? But
no. If anything, I think you would start. I think it's probably going to be Miley because he's had the postseason experience, and then you probably do a 2 or 3 inning piggyback thing between Miley and Hauser.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or maybe it's 3 and 3 or 2 and 2 at some point, and then just get to your bullpen.
Or one batter because it's the Brewers, right? I guess you can't do that anymore. But
well, you can't do that anymore. But
But yeah, I mean, I think that. I think it's going to be tough for Milwaukee because I do think Arizona will score some runs. I don't know if they'll score them on Burns, but I think they can put up a few runs on Peralta. And I definitely think that whoever else they might throw, Wade Miley and Hauser, whoever throws game 3, I think they could put up some runs on. But for the Brewers to win, they have to win game 1. But I think the Diamondbacks are going to pull it off in 3 games. But that's a low confidence pick. I think it's going to be a tight one. It's going to be difficult it's going to be difficult to win that, but I think they can do it.
Yeah, so for me, I think I would have picked Milwaukee had they had Brandon Woodruff.
I would.
As soon as I saw the Woodruff news today, it swung to me picking the Diamondbacks. like Matt said, I think the Diamondbacks are basically essentially kind of saying we're going to give you game one with Burns anyways, because it would have been a 50-50 Burns versus Gallen. That's going to be a pitching duel there. You might be able to get one over on Gallen, and if we're not able to get on Burns at that point, but then we're just basically going to throw Gallen against Peralta. We probably feel like we can get to Peralta. You're not going to get to Gallen. And then game three, like throw whatever random pitchers you're going to go throw out there. We're going to throw Merrill Kelly, who's pitched in some big games as well. And I just think in those two games, like they're really, if you look at the Milwaukee offense, it's like this year it's been William Contreras and it's been Christian Yelich. Outside of that, like Willy Adames hit 24 homers, but he had a 94 WRC plus, only hit 217. I mean, their other guy who has it's starting in their lineup that has over a 100 WRC plus is Mark Canha at 120. He came over midway through the year. Like the rest of this offense is just not good. Willy Adames, Sal Frelick, Joey Weimer, Victor Carantini, Owen Miller, Tyrone, like none of these guys. I mean, Santana came over as well at the deadline, but it just there's not a ton of confidence here in this offense. Where I think if you look at Arizona, you're going to have Christian Walker, you're going to have Ketel Marte, you're going to have Corbin Carroll. Like they have some offensive firepower that can strike real fast at you, and it's not just one guy in Arizona. And the fact that they have the pitching advantage after game one, in game two and game three, I think it just swings that towards Arizona's favor. Having that advantage and basically just saying, here's Burns, go ahead and take that one. We'll make it up on the other side, hopefully. So I think Milwaukee's offense is not going to be able to do enough to get the series done.
It is possible I only see Milwaukee's offense at their best as they always crush the Cubs. But that it's possible I'm biased there, but also, if anything, I'd love to be wrong here and we could send the Brewers home as soon as possible.
Well, let's be honest, that's what it really is. This is a jinx pick for you.
That's correct.
Yeah. And now that you've admitted it, it's not going to work, and that's why I did it. Boom, get roasted. Let's go ahead and jump over to the last series we have here, and that's going to be Miami against Philadelphia. Probably the most overmatched series we're probably going to see here. But Matt, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I definitely think this is a series that I think the Phillies are a much better team than the Marlins. Now it is the postseason, and anything can happen. The one thing that the Marlins do have going for them is that they were able to line up their pitching for it, because with all the starters they have hurt, they really only have two really good starters left. And both of them are going to be able to pitch because they were able to clinch on Saturday, I think. So, because Luzardo would have gone on Sunday, in their final game of the year. But Luzardo is really their guy that can shut down a lineup. And, if they can maybe find a way to win game one against Wheeler with Luzardo, then, you give yourself two opportunities to steal a game after that. So, I mean, that's really the path for the Marlins. I just don't see it happening. I mean, the Phillies are experienced after last year in the postseason. They have a lot of veteran players. They hit home runs. They're built for a wild card series because they have two really good pitchers at the top of their rotation, in Wheeler and Nola. Nola hadn't had a great year, but he's still capable of coming in and mowing down a lineup. And he also has really been better than his ERA shows. So I definitely think the Phillies are the team to beat here. But hey, I would never count out a Marlins team in the postseason because they never lose in the postseason unless there's a pandemic, which there's not now. So they've never lost a postseason series that had fans in attendance. So I definitely would never count them out, but I think the Phillies are going to win this one.
Yeah, so I had to look it up. The Phillies lost the season series with the Marlins 6-7, and went 2-4 versus Miami at home. So the Marlins they won more games in Philadelphia against the Phillies than the Phillies did this season. I am going to pick that rights itself and that the home team wins a couple of games, that the Marlins' dream run ends here. The Phillies just have the power, right? Bryce Harper is on a roll right now. Kyle Schwarber hit 40 something home runs, 46 homers, I think. And while he didn't seem to find his footing in terms of batting average, Kyle Schwarber in the playoffs is one of the better. He's got like that George Springer type playoff pedigree where he just comes out to play in the playoffs. Hits very well against high velocity fastballs, and that's what you see a lot of the time in the playoffs. So yeah, give me the Phillies, give me the high octane offense of Schwarber, Castellanos, Harper, Trey Turner, and we'll see them move on. This one feels like kind of an obvious pick as well. Honestly, there's 3 series. I'll be surprised if they go the other way. Maybe not for Milwaukee Diamondbacks, but definitely this one in Tampa. I'll be shocked if the home team didn't win these. I think these are pretty straightforward series. The pitching matchup favors the Phillies. The hitting matchup favors the Phillies. The bullpen matchup favors the Phillies. This just feels like a Phillies win, and it's an NL East party, because I think then they would go face the Braves.
Yeah, they would go face the Braves. Yeah, for this one, I'm going the Phillies as well for everything that you guys have mentioned. They have the pitching matchups here. I mean, Luzardo and Garrett are good, but they're not Wheeler and Nola. And then even if they were able to somehow steal that one of those games to get to game 3, like I don't even know who the Marlins would start. Like, is it Johnny Cueto, or is it like a bullpen game? Like I'm not sure.
It would probably
We're
be
like
just
with the Phillies. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it probably would just be straight up
It'd be
bullpen
who?
game. Like just start Tanner Scott
Yeah,
your
I mean,
closer, like that kind of thing.
yeah, like I'm not sure where that would even go, and Philly would just demolish that. And then Philly themselves, I mean, we saw last year Ranger Suarez broke out in the postseason. Like, he had that feel for that big game pitcher. He hasn't pitched all that well this season, but I mean, he showed that he could do it last year in the postseason and buckle down. I'm sure that would probably be their game 3 starter at that point. But once you start talking about this offense of Harper, what Trey Turner's been able to do recently, what Kyle Schwarber has done this season and in the postseason in his career, like JT Realmuto, Brandon Marsh. I mean, we saw this Phillies team really step up last year in the playoffs offensively, and I just don't think that Miami has enough pitching at the moment to be able to keep up. I mean, had they had Sandy and maybe Yuri or some of that, like maybe you can talk yourself into thinking that it would be a closer series. Still don't know if you pick Miami, but I just don't see it. Philly is, I think, too good just for this Miami team. And also I want to see another Philly versus Atlanta matchup, because that is a really, really fun postseason matchup. We saw it last year, and I want to see a rematch of that because it was a lot of fun. So, yeah, I'm going to go Philly. So, as our predictions right here, David had Minnesota over Toronto, Tampa Bay over Texas, Milwaukee over Arizona, and Philly over Miami. Matt had the Twins and the Rays as well, the Diamondbacks and the Phillies. And then I had the Rangers, the Blue Jays, the Phillies, and the Diamondbacks for that one. So, that will be starting tomorrow, Tuesday, October 3rd, go through October 5th, that Thursday. So I think we plan on being back Friday to kind of wrap this up and look forward to the division series matchups. But as far as that goes, that's what that's going to be. Now, looking ahead to a couple other news and notes that we just want to wrap up on here real quick. It was announced on Saturday that the Baltimore Orioles will be without Felix Bautista, their closer for the playoffs, and most, if not all, of next year, as he had to undergo Tommy John surgery. He got placed on the IL, I think, early or late August or mid-August with a flexor strain. They were hoping that he could work back through it and get back maybe for the postseason or just be able to rehab it, and that was not the case. He did sign a 2-year extension, so he is signed through 2025. But that's a massive loss for the Baltimore Orioles, losing their closer that they potentially hoped to have back for the playoff run.
Yeah, they did a good job finding. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just gonna say we'll see what happens with we'll talk more about it probably on Friday, but the Felix Bautista, losing him is an enormous deal for the for the Orioles, because he really, he put up over 3 WAR this year as a reliever, and he didn't even pitch the whole season. Like, he was that good, and losing him really hurts. He was like their second highest WAR pitcher on their entire team as their reliever. So that doesn't bode very well. And I know Yenier Cano has had a good year, but they just don't have the same kind of depth in that bullpen without Bautista there, and that definitely hurts them. So,
You got anything, David?
Yeah, this is the same deal that Herman Marquez got, essentially, right? To the recover from Tommy John, and then we'll see what happens the year after that. At least you can let me rehab with the team. I don't have to worry about income. Good deal for Felix Bautista here. Way to get ahead of this. And the Orioles have really found a niche in acquiring under-heralded guys like Bautista and Yenier Cano. I think that they'll be all right for next year. They'll find another way forward in terms of closer options. And and I think Bautista will be back, and he was really good this year. So it's a shame that he won't be part of this postseason, but it kind of turns the spotlight to Yenier Cano.
Yeah. And like Matt said, we'll talk more about that here when we on Friday when we're previewing the division series. But not to mean to end on a somber note, but we did have a shocking kind of bit of news happen this past week. I believe it was on Thursday. It was first announced. Kurt Schilling, which wasn't a great way to announce this, but Tim Wakefield was battling cancer, and then it came out on Sunday that he had passed away. Tim Wakefield is notoriously, spent 17 seasons in Boston as a knuckleballer, had 200 wins, 180 losses, 4.41 ERA, but just who doesn't like a knuckleballer around all the time? And he was a real professional, I guess, nothing but rave reviews from everyone around Boston, and that, and obviously one of the fun guys to watch, but he passed away on Sunday due to cancer. So rest in peace to Tim Wakefield. And if you guys have any thoughts.
Did y'all see the George Kirby throwing the knuckleball on Sunday? That was pretty cool.
What a legend.
Thoughts for Tim Wakefield and his family. That it's really sad to hear. I remember, growing up, knowing who he was and everything, and he was always fun to play on, the video games with, because he had the knuckleball, and that was always a good time. And just, he kind of stuck in my memory because of all that, and had a very long career. I don't think people realize he was on the Pirates teams that were in the NLCS in the early 90s, I believe. He had a long career, which is typical of a knuckleballer who's good. But very very, very sad news there for Tim Wakefield, and I hated to hear that.
I used to throw a knuckleball in high school, so I'm hoping that the art will come back. But in terms of Tim Wakefield, we obviously, sucky situation. I've only ever heard good stories about Tim Wakefield, so rest in peace, and hopefully he can, that legacy can kind of carry on. We already saw, he's made an impact on George Kirby, who's like a star in today's game. And Tim Wakefield pitched back when George Kirby was born. So just disappointing for sure in terms of how that was released, and then obviously that the news is pretty grim. So we keep ending on bad notes. Brooks Robinson last week, Tim Wakefield this week. Man,
I know. If only the show planner would plan this stuff a little bit better, huh? But anyways, so like we said, this is the wild card starts tomorrow. We'll go through Thursday. We'll be back Friday. Probably episode will probably be out Friday night or early Saturday morning to review the wild card round, previews for the division series, and then look for us. We'll probably announce the actual date on Friday, but sometime during that Division Series round, we want to do a live stream of a game at some point. So we'll announce the actual date of that, but be on the lookout for one of those ALDS series games. We'll do a live stream for. But thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Batflip Podcast, and we'll see you guys back here on Friday.